everybody, and welcome back to the long-awaited continuation of the Sonic Review series. With the end of the Dreamcast, Sega started to begin publishing games for other systems like the PS2, Xbox, and GameCube, and at the time it was definitely weird to think that a Sonic game would appear on a Nintendo system along with the others. Fans had hoped that Sonic Team would start off Sonic's future on these new systems with Adventure 3, however, a third adventure was apparently not in the cards. Instead, Sonic Team released Sonic Heroes in 2004 in response to the platform shift. The game's director, Toshiyuki Iizuka, stated that they decided not to make Heroes a direct continuation of Adventure 2, since the team feared that only Sonic fans would buy it, and they would be isolating the other gamers. Heroes is very different from the last two games, but it still manages to retain some of the core mechanics found in Adventure. The story takes a bit of a back seat after the more cinematic nature of the Adventure games. The game's plot mostly revolves around Dr. Robotnik telling Sonic that he's gonna destroy the world in 3 days, and challenges Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles to stop him. Not exactly the best plan considering Robotnik's track record. There are 4 campaigns to play through, and each has their own individual focus, with a final episode being unlocked upon completing of all 4. The biggest change to the gameplay from the Adventure series is that now you get to control 3 characters at once with the ability to switch at will. The characters are divided into 3 abilities: Speed, Fly, and Power. As mentioned before, there are 4 campaigns with 3 characters each. There's Team Sonic featuring Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles, Team Dark featuring Shadow, Rouge, and E123 Omega, Team Rose featuring Amy Rose, Cream the Rabbit, and Jesus Christ, Big the Cat. And finally, Team Chaotix featuring Vector the Crocodile, Espio the Chameleon, and Charmy Bee. Team Chaotix might seem a bit weird considering that none of these characters were in the last 2 games. Surprisingly enough, these characters are actually from a game called Knuckles Chaotix, a Sega 32X game from 1995. So you're including characters from a game that very few people played on a peripheral to a system that very few people bought. Okay. Each character has a select ability to help you make it through the stage. Sonic, Shadow, and Amy are your speed characters, good for light dashing and wall jumping. Tails, Rogue, and Cream are your flying characters, helping you reach high platforms and using vents to gain more height. And finally, Knuckles, Omega, and Big are your power characters that are good for battling enemies and breaking down obstacles. Team Chaotix characters have these same abilities as well, but their levels are more about collecting objects in each of the action stages rather than just making progress through them. Now, with the 4 teams, you'd think that there would be a lot of diversity between each one, but each team essentially goes through the same levels, for the most part. The major difference between the teams is the difficulty. Team Sonic is your standard difficulty, Team Dark is slightly more challenging, and Team Rose is Sonic for Dummies. Now, I'm dead serious. Unlike with Team Sonic and Team Dark, Team Rose starts off with a tutorial that not only explains the controls of this game, but the general controls of all Sonic games, like what rings do. The game moves from action stage to action stage, much like how Adventure 2 worked, and occasionally you get to fight a boss. The boss fights are a bit disappointing given the new nature of the gameplay. You'd think that you would have to use each character's special abilities to inflict damage, but personally I found myself homing attack as Sonic in order to build the Team Blast Bar, and then unleash my Team Super Move, which would usually take the boss out in 1 to 2 hits. Now, all of this sounds really fantastic, and on paper this type of gameplay seems like an interesting evolution off of Adventure's gameplay. However, the controls and level design make Sonic Heroes a nightmare to play through at times. If controlling Sonic solo in the Adventure games has ever felt twitchy to you, then just imagine what controlling 3 characters under the same twitchy control system would feel like. Control is loose, very loose, and slightly putting too much force on the analog stick will send your characters flying across the stage. Even when trying to attack enemies, you'll inexplicably be thrown across the screen with no warning. Thankfully, the controls for switching between the characters and using their individual abilities does work well. This control is actually not a problem in the early stages, but once you get about halfway through the game and the levels start introducing a lot of platforms and numerous pits, oh, the fun begins. The platforming here is atrocious thanks in part to the camera. The camera goes up too far and you can never see where you're going to land, and if you miss the landing, you're screwed since there's no way to save yourself. Look, I know that platforming was a big part of the original Sonic Genesis games, but there the control was tight and the 2D style made it easy to land jumps. I mean, if Sonic Heroes is proving anything at this point, it's that 3D Sonic games are nowhere near ready to include platforming, at least until the controls are more refined. Thanks to those controls, you'll suffer numerous deaths, most of them being cheap deaths that you'll not be responsible for. There is challenging and unfair, and Sonic Heroes is more of the latter thanks to the controls. The controls really ended up souring my experience of Heroes. I like the general idea of switching between characters and using their special abilities, since it seemed like a nice homage to the Genesis games, which were not always about just clearly running to the end of a level. You had to engage in platforming, find hidden paths, etc., and it seemed like Heroes was trying to recapture that experience. The presentation is where things tend to get a bit tricky. For this review, I played the PlayStation 2 version, which is notoriously known for being the worst port of Heroes. The PS2 version suffers from glitches, frame rate issues, and some bland graphics at times that look quite similar to the Adventure games, and not in a good way. I've seen footage of the GameCube version online, and that seems to run a lot more smoothly and has less graphical faults, so if anything, I recommend you stay the hell away from the PlayStation 2 version. The voice acting retains most of the actors from the Adventure series, with the exception of Tails, who now sounds like a 4-year-old that's battling the flu. and Biggs the cat still has that brain damage from Adventure 1. Thankfully, with a few cutscenes, you really don't have to put up with the voice acting too much. However, characters tend to not shut up during the action stages, commenting on everything every few minutes. And given that thanks to the controls you'll be dying and restarting a lot, you're going to be hearing that chatter over and over again. The music is actually not that bad, invoking a really interesting style of the original Genesis games again, though personally I didn't find it as engaging as the music from the Adventure series. Overall, Sonic Heroes was a pretty big disappointment for me. I was interested in the new mechanics of controlling multiple characters and using abilities to make progress through the levels, and I did enjoy the first few stages, but once those stages started to rely on platforming and pitfalls, the controls really started to get on my nerves. I suffered numerous cheap deaths, and I had to restart some levels multiple times thanks to that. Now, while I was playing, I thought that maybe I just sucked at the game and it was all my fault, so I decided to do some research on what fans think of Sonic Heroes. Surprisingly, I found that the game has a bit of a mixed reception. Some people like Heroes, praising the fact that it tried to capture the feeling of the old-school Sonic games, while others tend to hate it due to the poor performance on the PlayStation 2, the controls, and the unfair difficulty stemming from the controls. And also, some people write Heroes off completely since it just wasn't Adventure 3. And seriously though, there are more legitimate reasons to take issues with Heroes than just hating on it because Sonic Team chose to make this in place of Adventure 3. Sonic Heroes is a game that's not going to be for everyone. You really have to persevere to make it through the entire game. If you can get over the controls or somehow learn to work with them, then Sonic Heroes might be somewhat enjoyable. Other than that, Sonic Heroes is a game that has great potential and interesting mechanics that are ended up being dragged down by controls, which tend to make it a shorter playthrough. And now we've reached the moment of the Sonic Review series that many of you, including myself, have been waiting for. It's time to finally look at the game that essentially shattered the respect anyone had left for the Sonic series. Sonic had been through a rough time adapting to 3D with the adventure games and Heroes, but his next game would forever change the way the gaming world viewed this once revered series. So come back next time as we finally get to look at Sonic the Hedgehog 2006. Thanks for watching.